The president decided that it was time to lay the law down with the countries that are hosting Hamas leaders. And this was a last resort, but very, very effective threat.
What if you could talk to one of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's senior advisors and a man that was in the room when Netanyahu and President Donald J. Trump were finalizing the negotiations on his 20-point peace plan, the plan that has led to this historic and dramatic moment in which it appears that in the coming days, every single hostage will be released by Hamas from the dungeons, the terror tunnels in the Gaza Strip. What if you could spend some time with one of the people that was in the room? That's what we're about to do on Inside the Epicenter. Hi, this is Joel Rosenberg, one of the founders of the Joshua Fund with my wife, Lynn, almost 20 years ago. And this is the Inside the Epicenter podcast. This is the flagship educational project of the Joshua Fund. The podcast has, started about 4 years ago, and to our astonishment, it has soared since the October 7th invasion 2 years ago, first into the top 1.5% of all podcasts in the world. And then at the beginning of 2025, it moved into the top 1% of all podcasts. And so that's telling us something very encouraging, that there's an enormous interest in long-form conversations about what's really happening in Israel, what's really happening in the Palestinian areas, what's really happening in the church in Israel and the Arab Muslim world. And my wife Lynn and I are very honored to host this podcast. And we're doing this special edition today because I had an opportunity to speak on Thursday afternoon with the Israeli ambassador to the United States. His name is Yechiel Leiter. I've known Ambassador Leiter. He was then not the ambassador yet, but he's actually a rabbi. He's a PhD. He's a Middle East expert, and he's been a friend of Benjamin Netanyahu for decades. Yechiel Leiter and I met around 2003 or so when Netanyahu was the finance minister in the Israeli government. He had already been the prime minister from 1996 to 1999. Netanyahu had lost his re-election. I worked for Netanyahu in the fall of 2000 on his comeback campaign team for a few months, not in a very senior capacity, but on his communications team. And Netanyahu did not come back as prime minister at that time. Netanyahu got blocked from running. And instead, the man who ran was Netanyahu's chief rival within his political party, Likud, a man named Ariel Sharon, a famed IDF general who ended up winning in 2001 to be the prime minister, and asked Netanyahu to be his finance minister. And it was at that time that Netanyahu and his team put together the most sweeping free market economic reforms in the history of Israel, helping shift the country from a socialist country, as how it was started in 1948, to a very dynamic and much improved free market economy that was attracting foreign direct investment, that was creating a high-tech infrastructure industry, with Silicon Wadi, as they would call it, instead of Silicon Valley, becoming a high-tech superpower and an economic powerhouse in the Middle East without being driven by oil, where other governments in the region were wealthy, but because of natural resources. And Israel was developing a high-tech, high-growth economy. And Netanyahu gets an enormous amount of credit. And at his side was Yechiel Leiter, who was his chief of staff and most senior advisor at that time. And that's how I got to know Yechiel, because I went to see Netanyahu, and Netanyahu introduced me to Yechiel. And so just at the end of last year, at the end of 2024, as Netanyahu was preparing his team, he knew that his previous ambassador was going to be moving on, Michael Herzog, and a good man, and he'd been a good ambassador. And now Netanyahu wanted to appoint his own, trusted person, and that was Yechiel Leiter. So I did the first interview that Yechiel Leiter did with any American or Israeli or any media outlet upon becoming nominated for that position of ambassador, literally just days before Leiter left Jerusalem and went to the United States. That was an interview that aired on the Rosenberg Report on TBN, and later, not that long after, we ran that here on Inside the Epicenter. I contacted Leiter on Thursday morning to see if there's any way I could get him on the phone to get some insights. What was happening? This huge breaking news that the hostages all seem to be coming home, and that the first phase of President Trump's dramatic, detailed 20-point peace plan that's gotten buy-in from not only Israel, but most of the Arab and Muslim world. What was really happening? What were the atmospherics? What were the details? What's coming with President Trump's apparent and now confirmed trip to Israel to speak to the Israeli Knesset? And I wanted to talk to someone who was at the epicenter of those events. And very graciously, Leiter's staff told me that he would love to talk to me, but I would need to do a phone call with him while he was driving to the airport from the Israeli embassy in Washington to Washington Dulles International Airport, where he was going to catch a series of flights to get him back to Israel before sundown on Friday night, which would be the beginning of Shabbat. Yechiel Leiter is a devout Orthodox Jewish man. He is a trained rabbi and a very devout and committed Zionist. And the religious side of him is he's a kippah-wearing, kosher-keeping Orthodox Jew, and so he wanted to make sure to get back to Israel before the Sabbath began at sundown on Friday night, but also in time to adjust a little bit and spend time with Prime Minister Netanyahu preparing for the arrival of President Trump, who will be arriving very early in the morning in Tel Aviv on Monday morning, and then traveling to Jerusalem, where he will not only meet the Prime Minister and the President of Israel, but where he will be addressing Israel's parliament, the Knesset, as well. Lots going on. So here's that interview. It runs 17 minutes. We're going to run it now, and then we'll take a break. And when we come back, I want to make a few comments and then give you a few more headlines of things that have happened in the hours since I recorded the interview. Just a couple of things to watch for as you listen to the interview. What I want you to note is, and we'll put a link to the article we posted on All Israel News. It was the lead story Friday late afternoon. And so we'll put a link to that in the show notes. And some of the things that I say here, there'll be even more details in that article. But some things to watch for. One of the things, I think the thing that was most striking to me is that, yes, Ambassador Leiter, praised President Trump for his courageous and very focused and brilliant negotiating strategy with his team, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio. And he really praised Trump and his team that made this happen. Along with, of course, you'd expect the ambassador to praise Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. For Trump, he's praising the diplomatic strategy that really tried and then succeeded in getting Hamas to yes. Not on the whole 20-point plan. You'll see that in the interview that the focus right now is entirely on this first phase, entirely on getting all the hostages out and having Israel pull back from controlling about 86% of the Gaza Strip through the Israeli military, and it would pull back to about 53%. So that's important, that Israel will still control more than half of Gaza and all the strategic choke points and strategic places, but it will recede a bit, and there'll be a ceasefire. And then the hostages will come out in the coming days, hopefully on Monday and Tuesday, and then there'll be negotiations to get to the next set of stages in the peace plan. So you'll hear Ambassador Leiter talk about those things. And importantly, why? Why did Hamas finally say yes after 2 years of saying no? Why did they decide to give up the hostages, which are theoretically their only points of leverage? It's their only chits in the game, right? So why? And it's a very interesting discussion, and I want you to watch for that. But I think the most important thing that struck me is the diplomatic strategy by Trump and his team, but also the military strategy by Netanyahu and his team, where Netanyahu was ordering the IDF to push deeper and deeper into Gaza, and particularly into Gaza City. That was the last stronghold. You'll note in the interview that Leiter identifies that Israel had already destroyed 23 of the Hamas military terrorist battalions, okay? But there were 2 more that need to be destroyed, and they are located in Gaza City. So Netanyahu military strategy, pushing, fighting to destroy all of the Hamas battalions. Leiter credits to putting so much pressure on that it really helped the Trump diplomatic strategy, telling Hamas, listen, you got to give up all these hostages and you got to prepare to give up all control of Gaza, because otherwise you're going to literally be dead in the coming days. So Leiter praises those 2 elements, and he goes into the why. What exactly was it that moved Hamas? And it's a very interesting perspective. The other key thing, and again, I've been signaling this, the thing I think was most important is, in addition to the diplomatic and military strategy, Leiter is very clear. He says, I really think we are seeing the hand of God in this, meaning he believes that there's a supernatural element to what has just transpired. And that's encouraging to me, that he is basically saying, yes, there's a lot of hard work and the fighting of the soldiers and so forth, but it's God's hand, the God of Israel's hand, that is forcing Hamas to surrender. And that's really important. And he also praises one more thing, as I want you to watch for, is his discussion of him as a devout Orthodox Jew, an Israeli, and his friendship with U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, a devout evangelical Christian, and of course an American. So listen to his conversation about that. It's very warm, it's very interesting, and actually it's a very historic relationship. So let's listen to the interview, and then we'll take a break, and then we'll come back with a little bit more analysis and some of the top headlines of what's happening, what to watch for this coming week. Ambassador, thank you so much for chatting with me on All Israel News. I understand you're on the way to the airport. Are you in Washington en route to Jerusalem?
Yes, Joel. Well, thank you. It's good to be with you. I'm en route from Washington to Newark, where I get a flight to Washington, to Jerusalem. Yes.
I know that exact flight many times. Wow, this is a huge development. I'm so encouraged. What can you tell me first about kind of how this thing has played out, and then what's happening next? Is the president definitely coming to speak at the Knesset? Maybe we start there, because that's the news going forward.
Yeah. Well, it's constantly changing. The Trump White House is very dynamic. But as it stands now, the president will be coming, please God, Monday morning.
Okay.
Early, and then going straight up to Jerusalem to speak at the Knesset.
On Monday. That's the plan.
On Monday.
Okay.
Yes.
Wow. Do you know if he's going to anywhere else in the region?
I do not.
Okay.
I do not. It'll be a short visit to Israel.
Okay.
There is talk that he'll visit Egypt as well.
Right.
The same day, also a very short visit.
Okay.
I think one has to point out the tremendous symbolic aspect of the president visiting the day before Simchat Torah.
Yes.
Tuesday will be the holiday.
Unbelievable.
The very same holiday on which the Hamas stormed southern Israel and took these people hostage, and they'll be released on the very day that they were taken hostage, or a day before.
I appreciate you pointing that out, Ambassador, because of the differences between the Hebrew calendar and the Western calendar. The fact that we've just had October 7th, I don't think people realize that on the Hebrew calendar it's going to be 2 years to the day.
2 years to the day. It's quite remarkable. About your question as how this came about, we have to pay attention to 2 vectors. The first vector is the president decided that it was time to lay the law down with the countries that are hosting Hamas leaders. And this was a last resort, but very, very effective threat. Either turn the screws on Hamas leaders and make sure that they follow through on what we want to get accomplished, and that's the release of the hostages, or else you're going to have to throw them out. And I think that Turkey in particular, once it was brought into the negotiating process, Turkey gives safety to a number of Hamas leaders. As a matter of fact, their entire financial structure is in Turkey.
Wow.
So between Turkey and Qatar, where the Hamas leaders also reside, they both laid down the law and made it very clear to Hamas leadership that they've got to move on this, and that was due to the president's pressure. That's the first vector. Ironically, the decision to go ahead with that was probably due in no small measure to our missile attack on the leadership of Hamas itself in Qatar. I know that everybody will raise eyebrows and say, well, that was condemned and everybody was upset, and even the prime minister apologized. Well, the prime minister did not apologize. That was completely taken out of context.
My understanding from the reporting was that he expressed regret for the death of a particular Qatari civilian.
For a Qatari civilian that was killed. And, Qatar wanted that kind of fig leaf. They wanted that self-respect. So the prime minister paid that respect, but it was not an apology by any means. So in many respects, it was actually a very successful missile attack because it made it very clear to Hamas leadership that they're not going to be safe anywhere. And they could not maintain this refuge in Turkey and Qatar. And the message was sent to the leadership of those countries as well. So I think that had much to do with the president's decision to insist that it was time that they act in accordance with a civility, with any basic moral conscience, and tell Hamas that they have to move ahead, and this is what the president wants.
Right.
That was the first vector. The second vector is the fact that our soldiers who have risen like lions to defend the country.
Your son being one of them, who gave his life in the early months in a special forces unit to defeat Hamas and protect us. Thank you.
Yes,
thank you for your service.
Thank you for that, Joel. But he and his colleagues and the hundreds of thousands of soldiers who participated throughout this war, we have surrounded Gaza City and made it very clear. Prime Minister Netanyahu could not have been clearer. He said, if we don't move ahead with negotiations, we're going to move ahead with the military operations. And we were ready, we were poised, we still are, to take Gaza City, the last stronghold of Hamas, and completely eliminate them. We've eliminated some 23 out of 25 battalions, and we could take out the battalions that were reconstituted in Gaza City as well. So they felt the noose was around their neck. And ultimately, what we have here is a surrender, an admission of defeat on the part of Hamas, because the parameters of the Trump plan include a complete disarming of Hamas, a removal of Hamas from power, and an international agency that will see to it that Hamas and the Gaza Strip are completely demilitarized and de-radicalized. So that is 180 degrees from what Hamas wanted.
Yeah.
And now we just have to, be vigilant and make sure that phase 2 and 3 of the Trump parameters are actually implemented on time and to the degree that it's intended.
Yeah, because you and I are recording this this interview as you're heading to the airport to head to Israel on Thursday. But literally just yesterday, just hours before the president announced to the world that the deal was done, there was, I think it was 5 Hamas terrorists sprang out of a terror tunnel and tried to ambush an Israeli unit, tried to kidnap somebody. And just a few days before that, right, Israeli forces found long-range missiles in part of Gaza ready to fire on central Israel. Like, this is still a very serious situation. How confident is the prime minister and his senior team that Israel stepping back and controlling maybe 53% rather than 86% or whatever, we can still get to a demilitarization, which is point 1 on President Trump's remarkable 20-point plan?
Well, look, we're hopeful more than confident. If if the international agency that the president is establishing is not able to disarm entirely Hamas and demilitarize it, well, then we're going to have to go back in, and we're ready to do that. Look, there's 450 miles of terror tunnels in an area that's only 24 miles long and 8 miles wide. And no army in the world has had to deal with the extent of this terror network. So it's going to take time for any agency, for any military or civilian organization that's come together to demilitarize Gaza. It's going to take them time to actually implement this, because those terror tunnels have to be gone through, and there's so many different weapons that have been smuggled into Gaza over the years, mind-boggling numbers. So it's going to take a bit of time, but we are very, very hopeful. The president, look, he took upon himself to be the chairman of this peace board, he calls it.
Yeah.
I heard him in the Oval. We were sitting there, and he was talking about the different building projects he's done around the world, and now he's talking about, being responsible for rebuilding Gaza. So he sees this as a very personal endeavor, and usually when President Trump gets behind something, it gets done. So, we're very, very hopeful that at the end of the day, this will be implemented. If it's not, there won't be peace. The only way for there to be peace is for Gaza to be demilitarized. Israel cannot live once again with jihadi militants, with Islamic fascists on our border. We just can't do it. Not in Gaza, not in Syria, not in Lebanon. This is a very, very radical extremist ideology. By the way, Joel, they don't even believe in a Palestinian state.
Right.
All these happy idiots running around the campuses screaming the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. This is a caliphate organization. They're talking, this is Muslim Brotherhood.
Right.
This means that you have to have a caliphate and destroy Judeo-Christian civilization. And the beauty of the Abraham Accords is that it is the moderate Muslims, the ones who want a reformation within Islam, who are coming and saying, let's live side by side with Judeo-Christian civilization. And the first step to that is to accept Israel. So that's really what the battle is here against Iran and its proxies. Whether they're Shia or they're Sunni, they believe in a very, very radical extremist version of Islam, which means to eradicate us and then you and then the United States.
Yeah.
So we are very, very hopeful that this will succeed. It is a victory for the West. It is a defeat for Iran. That is very important. And we will persist in our hope that this goes the distance.
Amen. One last question, and that is, when I study this 20-point plan, I can't see where Israel would want more. I mean, I'm sure there's some in the cabinet I know who wanted to occupy and retake Gaza, and even biblically in Zephaniah chapter 2, that's actually going to happen one day, apparently prophetically. But in the current world that we live in, it seems like Israel got everything it was asking for to achieve its war aims, assuming that everything gets implemented as written. But could you just describe, before we go, just some of the atmospherics, in the Oval, between the president and the prime minister, because this is an extraordinary relationship that has achieved unprecedented achievements just in 6 months.
Not having been with us in the Oval, you're really onto something, Joel, because, there was this narrative that some journalists created. There was daylight between the president and the prime minister.
Oh, yeah, the president was using foul language to describe how much.
Well, it never happened. It's all a bunch of baloney, or malarkey, as the former president used to say. I sat next to the prime minister at lunch with the president across the table from the vice president and the secretary of state. It was a jovial conversation, but nothing speaks more to the fact that they have a wonderful relationship than the simple fact that the 20 points, as you mentioned, basically embraces the government's position from day one, which was all the hostages have to be released. Hamas has to be disarmed, Gaza demilitarized, and a situation created where Gaza could never again become a jihadi stronghold. And here the president came with his plan, and that's exactly what appears in the plan, that Hamas cannot remain standing. They cannot be in any way part of governing Gaza. They have to be completely disarmed. Gaza has to be completely demilitarized. And he created an international agency which is poised to do that and has been flagged with the responsibility to accomplish that. So that speaks more than 1,000 words about the relationship between them. They actually embraced the prime minister's position and put it into the peace plan.
Can you believe, I know I said one more question, but I have to just say before you go, can you believe where God has put you? You're at the epicenter. You for the prime minister, and my dear friend Mike Huckabee in Jerusalem for President Trump. I mean, you two, an Orthodox Jew and a devout evangelical Christian, are at the epicenter of the epicenter. It's an extraordinary moment.
It is an extraordinary moment, and I think it speaks so much to the values that we share, that this really is a battle for Judeo-Christian civilization. And together we are working to that end, that we want to see a Muslim civilization live side by side without intent of one devouring the other. Yeah. And I think that it really is the hand of God that we're seeing here between myself and Mike Huckabee, who's a great dear friend, a great ambassador, is doing incredible stuff in Jerusalem. And we're in constant contact. And I don't think there's ever been this kind of relationship between Israel's ambassador in Washington and Washington's ambassador in Jerusalem. So
amazing.
What can I tell you?
Well,
God bless.
I'm so grateful. I don't think I've ever said to somebody, and a fellow Israeli, Shabbat Shalom, with such a confidence that the Shalom was really going to be part of Shabbat, as I'm saying to you right now. So Shabbat Shalom, my friend.
I don't know if you know this, but my son's last words before the explosion went off that killed him was Shabbat Shalom.
Oh, I didn't know that.
He announced. Yeah, he announced on the wireless, he and his team were in search of a shaft to a tunnel in northern Gaza, and he had found the shaft, and he announced on the radio, "We have found the shaft, Shabbat Shalom." And as soon as he said Shalom, the explosion went off.
Oh, gosh.
So Shabbat Shalom is very meaningful to me, and I appreciate that. And indeed, we want a Shabbat Shalom not only of the week, but of humanity.
Oh, yes, and of a new Jewish year. So, Shabbat Shalom, happy Sukkot, happy Simchat Torah, and a very happy New Year to you, my friend.
Thank you very much.
I'm only sorry that I'm not jumping on the plane with you and going, but I've got to stay and focus on my family, and we'll do that.
May God comfort you on the loss of your mom, and may you know only good things in the coming year.
Thank you. Likewise, my friend. All right. God bless you. Thanks for being part of All Israel News, this special broadcast.
Bye now.
Bye-bye. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to chat with Ambassador Yechiel Leiter, even relatively briefly. I'm going to give you more headlines when we come back from the break. We do have to go to a commercial break, but when we come back, I'm going to give you more details of what has been happening since Thursday afternoon when I did the interview, and kind of what to expect in these coming days, especially as President Trump arrives in Israel, Lord willing, on Monday. The verse that's on my heart as we head into this extraordinary week with President Trump coming to Israel with hopefully every single hostage, both living and those that are deceased, being returned to Israel by Hamas as part of this deal brokered by President Trump and his team. The verse that's on my mind as I record this is from 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 16 through 18. The Apostle Paul is writing, "Rejoice always, pray without ceasing, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is the will of God in Messiah Jesus for you. Welcome back to this edition of Inside the Epicenter. What a great verse, and challenging to do, because when we're in our weakest moments, when we're sad, when we're grieving, when we're angry, when we're scared, it is very difficult to rejoice at all, much less always. It's difficult often to pray without ceasing, meaning totally being focused on talking to the Lord, just bringing every care, every fear, every concern to the Lord. It's difficult to give thanks sometimes at all in very high stress moments, much less to give thanks in all circumstances. When those circumstances are bad, when you are in pain, when loved ones are grieving, when fellow countrymen, neighbors are suffering, it's very hard to give thanks in all circumstances. But the Apostle Paul is telling us directly in 1 Thessalonians 5, 16 through 18, that this is the will of God in Christ Jesus, in the Messiah, Jesus, for you, for me. And I think that verse comes to mind because it has been so painful and so difficult, so challenging to obey this passage on October 7th, 2023, and for the last 735 days. And yet that's what God wants us to do. And it teaches us something. It teaches us that when God says rejoice always, what he means is no matter how bad your circumstances are, God is still God. He still created the universe. He still created you and me. He loves us. He has a wonderful plan for us, right? We know this from the prophet Jeremiah, where God says, I have loved you with an everlasting love. Therefore, I have drawn you with loving kindness, right? And then he also, of course, famously, God speaks through Jeremiah, the prophet, to say, I know the plans I have for you, plans for good and not for evil, plans to give you a hope and a future. And sometimes that's not obvious, right? We know from the Apostle Paul that he writes to the church in Rome, right, that I know all things work together for good for those who love the Lord and those who are called according to his purposes. And so these verses, among many others, especially the words of Jesus, tell us that we can trust God, right? Jesus told us not to worry, not to fret. It doesn't add anything, but to focus on the Father, to give thanks in all things. He tells us to, well, it's a very similar. Paul is picking up from the testimony of Jesus, right? And so he's saying that we're supposed to focus on God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto us. Yes, we can pray. We can ask, keep asking, seek, keep seeking, knock, keep knocking, and those doors will be opened for us. But we've got to stay persistent in prayer, but we need to trust that God's in charge. And let your heart not be troubled, Jesus commands us, because he says, I'm with you. Now, that doesn't always feel the case, and it has been hard for many to embrace those truths and rest in that and rejoice in it since October 7th. Now, when things start getting better, but that's still our goal, and that's God's will for us. And I'm very encouraged that many of you have told us that your faith has been strengthened and increased over these last few years, but we've all been shaken. But now we're at a point where, again, we should be rejoicing. And, now we have what we've been praying for 2 years. And now we're close to it anyway. As I record this, it's Saturday afternoon in Denver, Colorado. And we're watching, we're not only preparing for my mom's memorial service, which is on Monday, October 13th, but we're watching for all the preparations going on for the return of the hostages and the arrival of President Trump and his major address to the Knesset. So I want to leave you these verses, and then I want to give you some more headlines. Again, one more time: rejoice always, pray without ceasing, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you. And I'll admit there are many times that people that I know, people that I love, myself at times, have thought, are we really going to get all these hostages back? It seemed impossible in recent months. It seemed like every effort that President Trump and his team had made to broker a deal that Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu would say yes to, Hamas would say no to. So it was very hard to think that all these hostages would come out, including the ones that are alive. But we kept praying. We kept rejoicing that God is God. He loves us. He has a plan for us. And we're going to keep praying without ceasing. Yes, it didn't look hopeful, but that's what prayer is, praying for the impossible, praying that God would do it. And I think what you just heard from the Yechiel Leiter, the Israeli ambassador to the United States, is a man who believes the God of the Old Testament, the God of Israel. He doesn't believe in Jesus as Messiah. We recognize that between each other, and we're friends and good friends with that difference. But we both believe that the God of Israel has just moved mountains. We believe that the God of Israel has just forced Hamas to say yes. And now we're just praying without ceasing that it would all happen. And so I'm rejoicing. I'm giving thanks to the Lord. And I've been trying to do that for the last 2 years. I'm doing it this weekend as well. Even, as my mom has gone home to be with the Lord as well. I'm thankful. I miss her terribly. And last night, as I was finishing up writing her eulogy, I just broke down and was crying. But I'm thankful in all circumstances. I'm rejoicing in all circumstances because I know she's with the Lord. I would never wish her back here to earth with all the problems here and all the suffering physically that she was going through, rather than being in heaven with the God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, all the angels, all the saints. No, I wouldn't wish my mom back. She is worshiping at the feet of God, the God of the universe, and she is experiencing such glory. And I'm so grateful, and I can't wait to join her one day, but not that it's easy to miss her here. Okay, I want to give you a few sort of headlines as we wrap up this podcast. One of the issues is that the Israeli government is having to release a lot of prisoners, including hardened terrorists, murderers, Palestinian murderers with blood on their hands that have already been convicted in Israeli courts and given life sentences. So that is hard. But one of the worst Palestinian terrorists that is in Israel's prisons is a man named Marwan Barghouti. And Prime Minister Netanyahu has insisted that under no circumstances would Marwan Barghouti be released. There are some other names that you are even less likely to have ever heard of before that Netanyahu and his team are saying, look, they're never going to be released, so don't even think of it. But yes, this is controversial. There are some members of the Israeli cabinet that voted against acceptance of phase one of the Trump plan that would get all these hostages back. The cabinet discussed it at length and voted on it, and it passed. Israel accepted the Trump agreement to get the hostages out, but there were several members of the cabinet that voted against it, and that's because they're saying, look, I'm not going to vote for any plan that releases more than 2,000 Palestinian prisoners, about 250 of which are lifers, or people that have been convicted to life imprisonment because they're so horrible, and another 1,700 or so that were arrested and imprisoned for a range of different real or alleged, maybe not proven yet, crimes and terrorist acts, and are still in the prisons going through the justice process. And so Israel has agreed to release these folks. One of the things that's not clear, so that's going to happen, and I wanted you to know that the cabinet voted to accept that, although several cabinet members voted against it, including some far right-wing cabinet members, Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, who are the two most controversial members of the Israeli Netanyahu government. But the plan was accepted, and the prisoner transfer will happen. What's not clear yet is, are these prisoners going to be released into Gaza? Because the number one thing in the Trump plan is that the Gaza Strip will be demilitarized and de-radicalized. So that's something we'll be watching, and we'll report on as soon as we know for sure what the answer is. But it hasn't been released publicly. Where are these people going? Are they being sent to other countries, or are they actually being released into Gaza? And wouldn't that lead to more militarization and more radicalization in the Gaza Strip? So that's one issue. It's not exactly clear the precise timing of when the hostages will be released, but we believe it's no later than the end of the day on Monday, Israel time. Why do I say that? Because from the moment that the Israeli cabinet voted to accept the plan, that's when the clock started, and all of the hostages are supposed to be released within 72 hours. So that's why we're hearing reports already that Hamas is sort of gathering and rounding up all the hostages from all the different places that they've hid them in various terror tunnels, and they're gathering them and getting them ready to release. And that should happen, we're told, on Monday. And we'll keep you posted on that. And you can go to allisraelnews.com for more regular updates on that. President Trump will land at or around 9 a.m. Israel time, and he will land at Tel Aviv International Airport, Ben Gurion. There will be a ceremony there. He will then be transported to Jerusalem. He will meet with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Israeli President Isaac Herzog, and then he will be taken to the Knesset, Israel's parliament, where he will address the entire parliament of Israel and through live television address the nation and the region and the world. And I think that will be quite some speech. Very much looking forward to that. And of course, we'll be doing analysis of the speech on All Israel News, certainly on this podcast next week, Lord willing, and on the Rosenberg Report on TBN. So a couple other things before we finish. The two top presidential envoys, emissaries who deal with negotiating these big deals, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. Kushner having been the top negotiator for Trump in the first administration, but he's back helping Witkoff in this deal of all deals, this hugely historic moment. He's been working side by side with Steve Witkoff, and they were in Sharm el-Sheikh to finalize the negotiations. Sharm is a Red Sea resort town, an Egyptian town at the peninsula of the Sinai Peninsula, at the southern tip of the Sinai Peninsula. Lynn and I have been there, and our boys have been there with us, and it's just a beautiful location and a place where there's a Egyptian presidential retreat center there. There's also a convention center there, and there are often high-level events and diplomatic events that happen in Sharm el-Sheikh. And that's where Witkoff and Kushner were. Then they went to Israel to meet with Netanyahu and they briefed. It was Witkoff and Kushner that briefed the cabinet and walked them through all the details of the negotiated agreement to get the hostages out and let people ask questions, and they answered those questions. Again, they apparently did not convince Itamar Ben-Gvir or Bezalel Smotrich or their political parties, but they convinced everybody else and, again, gave them a personal, detailed briefing on how everything was going, and that led to the yes vote. A couple other things. So the ceasefire is now in place in the Gaza Strip, and Israel's forces, the Israeli Defense Forces, are preparing to now back up to preset lines that were negotiated. I mean, in great detail and great precision, and so they've already backed up a little bit based on the agreement to give Hamas space to get the hostages above ground and turned over to the Red Cross and the Red Crescent, and then driven out of Gaza and into Israel. As soon as that happens, we think that that's going to be Monday. So Hamas had insisted in the negotiations there had to be a ceasefire. They couldn't risk coming above ground and then being assassinated or bombed by Israeli forces. And Israel agreed to that. And then if the hostage transfer goes well, then it would lead to Israel pulling back further. But this is a huge win for Israel, that while they will pull back to these preset places, Israel will still control 53% of the Gaza Strip. As I mentioned earlier, 53%, more than half of Gaza will be controlled by the IDF. And Prime Minister Netanyahu has made it clear, if Hamas violates this, either doesn't give up all the hostages or gives up all the hostages but then violates or doesn't agree to a whole series of other elements of the Trump plan, the IDF is prepared to go and invade all of Gaza City all over again. So this is a hammer that Netanyahu is holding over Hamas to sort of enforce their compliance. The last point I want to make, and this is something that I really want you to pray about. Obviously, I want you to pray without ceasing that all these hostages really do come out, okay? We believe there's 48 hostages, 20 of which we're told are alive. They must be in terrible conditions, right? It's over 735 days at this point that they've been held. So they've been starved, they've been tortured, they may have diseases. And then the psychological horror that they're dealing with, it's just unimaginable. So we need to be really praying for them, for their families, and that they really do come out alive. We believe there's another 28 hostages that died in captivity, under Hamas captivity, and so those bodies need to be returned according to the deal. Now, this is something that's a concern, and I want to close on this because I really want you to pray without ceasing about this. Hamas is beginning to signal that they may not be able to find all of the remains, all of the deceased bodies, remains, bones of these hostages that died, there's 28. This is a problem because if they're not all returned and Hamas says, oh, we can't find them, are they telling the truth? If they're telling the truth, what have they been doing for the last 2 years? How do they not know who each of these hostages are at this point and where they are? And if they're lying, what does Israel do about it? What does Trump do about it? Most importantly, what does President Trump do about it if not all the remains are returned? This is something I'm concerned about because it may become a point of pain for Israelis, especially the families that are waiting for their loved ones so that they can bury them properly and with honor. What if they don't get closure? What happens? I mean, and how will Trump deal with it? I have little doubt that the Trump team has thought through this scenario, and I have even less doubt, if I had any doubt at all, that the Israeli team has been talking in great detail with the American team and the Egyptians and the Qataris, all the negotiators, what would happen in that scenario. Let's pray that doesn't actually happen. But I just want to signal to you that is something I'm watching. The other thing that I'm watching is, what if a Palestinian faction or elements of Hamas even decide that they don't like this plan and they're going to try to blow it up, literally or figuratively? What if Iran decides to launch some missile attack or some other terrorist attack somewhere? What if other terrorists in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, and people sneaking? What if the next couple of days go sideways and we'll see new violence that will rob, kill, and destroy the joy and the excitement that Israelis are beginning to feel? What would happen then? So I'm praying that doesn't happen. I'm praying God would sovereignly let this really start leading us to the end of this war and to quiet and the de-radicalization, the demilitarization of Gaza, even as Israel works to demilitarize and de-radicalize Judea and Samaria, what the world calls the West Bank. Well, that's a lot. I'm going to bring it to an end. I'm so grateful that you listened to this episode. I hope it was helpful. I hope it was encouraging, and I hope it gave you a sense of how to pray. I would encourage you to, if you can, to make a financial donation to, and even become a monthly donor to the Joshua Fund. You can go to joshuafund.com. Again, that's joshuafund.com. There's a big donate button in the top right-hand corner of our website, and you can give tax-deductibly and securely online. It gives you the option, the default option actually is being a monthly donor. So if you could give $50 or $75 or $100 a month, that would really be such a blessing, because we would know that you're with us for the longer term. If you can only give a one-time gift, we appreciate that enormously, whatever the Lord puts on your heart. Again, check out the show notes for anything that I've mentioned that you want to know more about. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you for your prayers from me and Lynn and our family, my dad in particular, my sisters as well, as we honor my mom. And we'll have more information and details from that ceremony once it happens on Monday. A lot going on in our personal lives, a lot going on in the Joshua Fund, and a lot going on in the Epicenter. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be with you soon for the next edition of Inside the Epicenter. God bless you. I'm Joel Rosenberg. On your left, you'll find some videos we've chosen specifically for you. We look forward to partnering with you to bless Israel and her neighbors in the name of Jesus.